Welcome, Exiles, to this companion video of our 0.4 Infernal Legion Witch Guide. If you haven't watched that yet, you ought to start over there. This appendix provides supplemental examples, looks over options, and gives rambling commentary. This is for the super nerd build brewer sickos, like myself, and perhaps like yourself. Similar to our Mythbuster series, this dives into mechanics, but it's obviously lengthier. We put them all here into one video instead of making each section its own. But you can still use the timestamps to jump through the verbosity right to your area of interest. As much as anything, I'd like this video to be a dialogue. If you have questions, ideas, data-backed corrections, or want to let us know what you thought of the video, comment section's right there, don't be shy. While you're down there, you can support our work by doing all the YouTube things. I'm sure you know what they are. And it'd also help us out if you have any mechanics sicko buddies. Share the video with them, they might like it. Let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. No, not that elephant. This elephant. Weapon swapping. You set a persistent minion to only show up on one of your two weapon sets, then swapping it will summon and unsummon. It's relevant for a couple of reasons. Most relevant to us is that swapping your minion will fully heal it. Which means if you use this technique, you don't really need to invest in any damage mitigation or recovery. Because as long as you switch before it dies, it'll come right back at full strength. The other way in which this matters to us is movement speed. Since you're force teleporting your minion to you, its move speed doesn't matter. You can continually move it through packs. And even though, for example, an elephant is very slow, your minions will just move as fast as you do. If I'm not mistaken, swapping also resets all the cooldowns on your minions, but this is more relevant for other builds. Every patch I expect GGG to fix this, and they never do. So it must be an intended mechanic. Hopefully they'll add some kind of convocation skill, and at that point get rid of it. Since my feeling anyway is that not having to invest in mitigating your Infernal Legion damage or balancing minion speed against minion health sort of cheapens the puzzle of figuring out a build. On the other hand, like I say, it's an intended mechanic, and I don't think there's anything unethical about using it if you want. It definitely is the most efficient version of the build. And it works quite well with Oil Grenade, since you can choose not to hold your minion on your crossbow. You oil as you run, and then periodically swap back to your spear to set off the oil. It's probably the most balanced way to combine the weapon swap tech with the oil grenade tech. If they patch this down the road so it's no longer doable, you can fall back to something like my Blade Harvester style. But at the current time, if you want the absolute strongest version of the build, catch yourself as chunky a beast as you can, not invest anything in movement speed, mitigation, recovery, and send those extra points into further defense or more damage. Just play whichever style is more fun to you.
My doctor told me not to eat anything fatty. I said, what, you mean like potato chips or something? No, he said, I mean, don't eat anything fatty.
So let's talk Scythe Spear. We first did videos on this tech back in 0.2. It's been unchanged since the time of recording, now in the later parts of 0.4. There's no expectation that they'll change it anytime soon, since it still seems to be fairly niche. The weapon itself doesn't have great damage, so I assume the concept of balancing this was that it would do a small ignite and then double it. And there would be an interesting interplay between bleeding and igniting, and maybe scaling damaging elements generically to push both forward. In our case, however, we don't do any real damage with this. We just do enough to proc what we need to proc. All of our damage comes from another source, the beast, and this aggravates the ignite that the beast creates. Aggravated Ignite is what we're really interested in. Deals 100% extra damage. This comes pretty much after all the damage of the hit has been calculated and turned into an ignite. This comes along and doubles it, which means it's a totally different avenue of scaling. The thing to be very aware of is the specific wording on this modifier. Aggravating any bleed with this weapon also aggravates the ignites. It means any other source of aggravating that doesn't come from an attack from this weapon will not work. First thing that jumps to mind here is the unique boots that aggravate bleed. Those should not work. There aren't any very convenient supports to get reliable one-hit aggravating, at least not in our general setup. So when I'm shopping for a spear, I try to get one with as close to max chance to aggravate as possible, which will reduce the amount of hits that we need to get the effect rolling. Getting a 100% chance to bleed is as easy as throwing on bleed 3 on any attack that doesn't convert all of the physical damage away. So in the case of Spear Field, touching any one of these spears will inflict a bleed, and statistically by the time it hits 2 or 3, it's likely that bleed will be aggravated. You can stack up quite a lot, and you can preset these in front of the boss, setting up your arena. We've also tried using Rapid Assault in the past because it has a guaranteed bleed at the end, so you don't need to waste a support gem. But that just seemed worse. It seemed slower. It usually took 2 attacks. You couldn't replace it, and it didn't have the same kind of utility that Spearfield has when it comes to kiting in maps, since you can retreat and put a spear field between you and the enemy, and it slows them down and will give you time for your beast to respawn or your energy shield to restart, whatever you need. In this patch, with some of the new items, we have a jewel that will let us take a keystone. It comes with a downside. Many of these downsides don't apply to us. For example, we don't care about our damage. We can use one of these jewels to get Crimson Assault. In that case, instead of using Spearfield, we could use something like Rake, which is going to always bleed and also has a high mobility. And pretty much whatever we raked, get bled, get aggravated, and the ignite already on it would get aggravated, and we would profit. We would also benefit from the mobility of Rake. I tested this for a while, but at the end of the day, I just preferred having the kiting utility of Spearfield, and then also giving up a jewel socket felt kind of bad since we had to get rid of our Megalomaniac. There's definitely a cost to be paid for taking the keystone. There are some other options to use the spear. As you know, we have Mirage Archer on our bow that leaves behind a Ghost of Us that will attack with a socketed gem. It's worth noting that this works with spears as well as bows and crossbows. So I've tested having this instead of on the crossbow, having this on the spear set, and having a projectile spear attack go off that would automate our shock and aggravate setup that we have currently on here. I didn't really feel like it was worth it, and I kind of preferred the additional clear. So until someone comes up with some better tech, Spearfield reigns supreme in my book. Pretty sure this was changed in version 0.4 to better support other sources of ignite lighting the oil. I tried this in previous patches, both with oil grenade and with Valguard Spectres that throw oil grenades, and it didn't have much success. Either the mechanic wasn't in place, or what may have been happening is that the skill itself would ignite the oil, put a small burn on it, and prevent my Infernal Legion or any other stronger ignite from setting the oil off. It seems like the first ignite to hit the oil will set it off, and it won't get overridden by a stronger ignite. And furthermore, I've had situations where firing more oil grenades continue to spread an initial small ignite, sometimes multiple screens, at which point you'd have to stop shooting and let the oil die out or make some kind of a fire break so they don't connect anymore. I have not gone through to thoroughly test Valguards. In this patch, their behavior was changed so that they throw oil grenades less often, which for our purposes is a nerf. If you are desperate not to use a crossbow and wanted the entire build to run on minions, it's conceivable that you could have Valguards spread your oil. I prefer to be more hands-on. Because we are an Infernalist with Bringer of Flame, we have a bit of a problem because skills like our Frostbomb and our Thunderstorm are able to ignite the oil. This means on pretty much every skill that hits besides the Infernal Legion, we're going to want to put Immolate or Elemental Focus. Immolate for attacks and Elemental Focus usually for spells. This will prevent stray lightning bolts from setting off the oil and make sure that it's available for the beast. Other classes will not have to deal with this restriction because, if they're not doing fire damage, they can't ignite, generally speaking. This is especially important on the oil grenade itself. Some of my tests failed early on because the oil grenade's damage would ignite itself and it would be another small, insignificant burn in comparison to the beast. You really need to make sure that you don't have any source of ignite other than the beast. The skill tooltip here is a little misleading. It says, oil created this way can be ignited by detonator skills or ignited ground. It fails to mention that oil ground can also be ignited by igniting an enemy who's on it, which is the way that the beast spreads it. You don't need a detonator skill, and you don't need a way to produce ignited ground. Ignited ground can set off more oil ground, so it's potentially able to chain sometimes several screens. You'll see this line here. Oil ground ignited adds unscalable fire damage. This is again a new change in patch 0.4. You can see the source of the damage is here. Ignited oil ground adds 150% of this weapon's fire damage as unscalable fire damage to the ignite. That is a new line. This incentivizes us to have some kind of damage on our crossbow. Without this, we really wouldn't care if it had any damage or not. I have some flat fire damage throughout my gear. Fire damage roll. You can also see that fire attunement will change the damage. We have here 17.8 and 14.2. So attacks gain extra damage is calculated into the oil ground bonus. Now at the end of the day, I don't know how important this is. Compared to the damage that the beast is doing, I think this is pretty negligible. So if you want a cheaper crossbow or one that's more focused on utility than damage, I think that's totally reasonable. Our attack time doesn't matter all that much, but our cooldown does. This is the main limiter as we move through the map. So getting what cooldown recovery we can helps us clear more smoothly. Projectiles fired per use, also pretty nice. 2 is fine, you can get a second one from the implicit on this whole family of crossbows. But in having 2, they shoot out to either side. And since they shoot out to either side, sometimes you have to aim say to the left of a target to make sure that you hit it and auto detonate the grenade. So having a third one is awful nice. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. And if the 2 grenades spreading irritates you, you can just use a different base. You'll have less coverage, but sometimes accuracy is more important. Just touched on these in the gem section, but encroaching ground and persistent ground are probably the 2 most important tools to keep our oil up, especially encroaching ground. You can really feel it spreading, and comparison of it where it sits right now versus where it initially shot is huge. And with the persistent ground, it stays at this size quite a while. There's very few non-boss enemies that would survive standing in there that long. Encroaching ground also helps your puddles connect to each other, and again, chain reaction. Could be worth mentioning Mirage Archer. The Mirage Archer double dips on cooldown recovery and duration because it helps both the Mirage Archer and the oil grenade. You have to have a way to keep it from igniting, and in my case I have a little utility here. If you don't have the spare to run the archer, again, it's reasonable to cut it. Its main function is to spread oil behind you as you move and clear areas where you're not present. For the most part, it'll mop up. It also is worth noting that oil barrage should work if you prefer trying to use a talisman. Similar bonuses apply. It is unscalable damage, same as oil grenade itself. This has the advantage of not being able to ignite on its own. It saves you 1 slot. You can see here that it already fires 3 projectiles. So if you push that up to 5, and you have Nova projectiles, coverage around you is pretty solid, and it spreads, of course. You can see there's a gap here, but if there was a pack of enemies, the projectile would have hit it on the way. This is fairly decent coverage. It feels a little random to me in practice. You could remove the Nova to shoot straight, but you're wasting projectiles in the same area this way. It feels more efficient to me to get coverage. You're not able to use Mirage Archer, but you do make up for that by getting Bounce, which gives you a whole new level of mobility, especially if you're combining this with Disengage. You're once again become a very slippery enemy. So Oil Barrage is a third option to spread oil on the map on top of Oil Grenade and Valguards. Oil Grenade is my preference, but your mileage may vary. If you find other options or you have opinions on how to make these better, I'm all ears. Alright, let's talk direct minions. You can find and change your direct minions keybinds over here in the input section of your options. For me, it's R. Although there's been cases where I've had it on left click. And it's pretty simple. You click where you'd like it to go, and it goes in the general direction. Click directly on an enemy, your minion should focus it. When you click on open ground, the minion should move there, and then engage any enemies in its vicinity. This can be useful to find, for example, a choke point and put your Infernal Legion beast in it. It can be useful when there's a pack of enemies here to run your beast to the far side of it. The beast will not slow down to attack any of the mobs and will burn them as it passes through. And this can generally improve your clear quite a lot. Between direct minions and positioning yourself to drag your beast through packs of mobs, this can be a pretty effective way to clear without having to weapon swap. This is especially the case with something like the Frozen Mandibles Ant. In that league, a lot of people spent quite a bit of time trying to get increased AoE on the Ant. If you use direct minions, it really wasn't required at all to have that mod, which made catching them much easier. This is much more powerful on mouse and keyboard because you're able to pinpoint click behind a group of enemies or a position you'd like your beast to hold. Whereas on controller, if you try to move the beast through a pack, you'll just direct it to attack the pack head on. It's also worth noting that there is no way to make control groups within your minion army. All of your minions will follow your command. This can be problematic when you have Frost mages or something that you don't want to be in melee range that will run in with your Infernal Legion beasts. This is part of the reason why we have just one beast and no supporting minions, since we don't want to see them chewed up in the most dangerous areas where the beast is going to go. Let's talk about Infernal Legion getting critical hits. By default, Infernal Legion has no crit chance, and it never crits. But if we can apply critical weakness to our enemy, we will get a base crit chance. The most common way to apply critical weakness in a minion build is with the Omen Scepter, which gives you this Malice aura. We end up slowly building a crit chance. I'm not sure whether Infernal Legion has a bugged 100% hit chance, or whether something about how it activates just rolls a lot of times, but it feels like as soon as critical weakness is on, you're able to crit very easily, and the higher the stacks you get, it seems to me ramps the damage further. Testing beasts, even with extra crit, in my testing against control beasts without the extra crit, and also all different combinations of critical hit chance and critical damage bonus, crit chance doesn't seem to affect things one way or another. So at the current time, there's no reason to invest in crit chance at all. One thing I need to replace is beast. For another thing, we can focus on getting minion critical damage explicitly and ignoring the chance. You can also use super critical and other ways to push your damage over. In my testing so far, Searing Flame seems to be more damage than super critical. I'm definitely not building around it because it could get nerfed any patch, and I don't want to be reliant on the damage. So my approach is to dip my toe in, get my easy crits from my scepter, and not overinvest in it. Again, diversifying as much as I can in how I scale. We just went over pseudo hits and why Infernal Legion counts as hitting, and that applies to the crits obviously. Could be mistaken in this approach, and going absolutely all in on critical damage bonus might actually be the most efficient investment right now. But from what I've seen, that hasn't been the case. Scaling extra, get. Scaling extra damage feels like Scaling extra damage feels like the easiest way to increase our ignite. Son of a goddamn. Scaling extra damage feels like the easiest way to scale your burn. The damage it provides is the equivalent of a great deal of minion health, but is easier to come by. Double extra damage, like you see on any of these, are one of the main reasons to run a companion over a specter. Each one of these gives 40% damage extra. There are some diminishing returns, of course, but there are other sources of extra damage. Ever Grasping Rings, Holy Might, etc. Pivotal one is Zospire. This gives 40% as extra and gives all classes the ability to have chaos damage or in the Ignite. I know that due to certain tooltips, people believe that extra damage won't work with damage over time. This is the case for debuffs that don't hit at all, like Essence Drain. But for ailments, that's Poison, Bleeding, and Ignite, those have to be based on a hit. This is why extra damage works, because the pseudo hit that the Infernal Legion inflicts is necessary to calculate how big the damaging ailment should be. This is why it crits. This is why extra damage applies to it. Extra damage feels very efficient to me because if you look at Infernal Legion, we see that the base damage is equal to a quarter of its life. However, if you get out your reading glasses and get through Ignite, you'll see that the fire damage per second is equal to 20% of the fire damage dealt by the hit that inflicted it. So if I read this correctly, and I could be wrong, we get a quarter of the beast's health. 20% of that quarter is what actually turns into damage. So investing directly in minion health might be less effective than just scaling the end damage. I'm not sure what the exact breakpoints are, but for me it seems like investments in extra damage have the biggest payoff. Alright, let's talk shock. This patch introduced Thunderstorm and the Drench mechanic. It'll automatically drench enemies in the area, which makes them more likely to be shocked. But what we really care about is shock conduction too. Hits from supported skills always shock drenched targets, which means as long as the enemy is drenched, any amount of lightning damage should shock it. This is why our spear has 1 to 30 lightning damage added in. We have no investment in shock chance whatsoever, or lightning damage. Shock conduction also spreads the shock, but it's not what we're interested in. The shock does make an enemy take more damage from Ignite, but another reason we're trying to use it is Stormfire. This was also changed this patch and given an interesting, uniquely worded line here. Enemies shocked by supported skills take 20% damage from Ignite as lightning damage as well as fire damage. Not sure exactly why it's worded this way instead of enemies shocked by the skill take 20% of Ignite damage as extra lightning damage. Maybe extra damage is a keyword they're trying to avoid in this context. Either way, from my testing, it still does the 20% fire and it does an additional 20% as lightning. If it only did that 20% as lightning, shifting the damage type, that really wouldn't help us a whole lot. So intuitively, it makes sense that this actually does just add 20% damage. 20% damage is lightning, it's not fire, and won't scale with any of your fire resistance debuffs. But luckily for us, our debuffs mainly consist of elemental weakness, which is all elements, and generic exposure, which is also all elements. And as far as I can tell, this is coming at the very end of all your scaling. Your extra damage, your crit, your aggravation, all make your Ignite bigger, and then shocking that enemy with this skill takes 20% of all that and adds it on top. So this is the cherry on top scaler. Again, in my case as an Infernalist, I have Bringer of Flame. A Thunderstorm would ignite my oil and complicate my life, so I have to put Elemental Focus on it. This doesn't only stop it from igniting, it also stops it from shocking. Unlike Immolate, which stops igniting, but doesn't affect any other ailments. Fortunately, Immolate can only go on attacks, and Thunderstorm is a spell. If you're playing a different class, you can pack everything into Thunderstorm. Shock Conduction, Stormfire, you would probably want to throw in Commiserate and Overcharge to get as big a shock as possible and have it all on one button. In our scenario, unfortunately, we have to work around an attack. None of our options are some kind of Mirage Archer automated. I don't like this because it's already one slot down. We need at least a second slot for Immolate. That doesn't give it a whole lot to work with in terms of putting in the 2 lightning supports that we need. I like putting it into Oil Grenade because I value most of the supports that we have, and Oil Grenade is a clear skill, and definitely don't need cherry on top damage for that. So the burden of shocking falls to Spearfield. This has Immolate, so it won't accidentally ignite the oil, but it also has Shock Induction and Stormfire. Any drenched enemy in the area that steps on a spear will be shocked by 100%, and the shock will apply Stormfire. They'll also be bled 100% and aggravated as soon as they hit 2 or 3 spikes. This is the sort of thing I care about throwing on a boss and don't need it for clear. Keep in mind that Thunderstorm does require quite a bit of strength early on, assuming you don't have a Vertex. This will give you even more stat pressure when you're leveling. Just make sure that your Thunderstorm is a high enough level to drench the targets that you're dealing with. Just like Curses or Frostbomb, the level of the skill limits how high of a level enemy it can debuff, which they do to keep you from leaving it on level 1. So you probably want to level it to the bare minimum. Because we're a minion build, I suppose we could also use a Storm Mage or something for our shock, but since I'm often directing minions, I would unfortunately be sending it into harm's way constantly. And as I went over, I don't need it all the time, I only need it in the boss arenas. So the whole point of taming a rare is getting rare modifiers. We'll go through the list here. I'll share my opinion on the different mods, and hopefully that'll help you evaluate in the wild. Starting off strong with stun immunity. It's not really relevant for us. It's intriguing. I'm sure down the road there'll be some use for it. Fire resistant, however, excellent mod for us. The base fire resistance can help to offset the malice that a lot of beasts have. Most beasts have negative fire res, or at least a large percentage of them do, including my wasp, for example. I think it has a negative 30% to start with, so you have a little extra to climb. Having fire resistant built in reduces the amount of investment in just base resistance you have to get, and then by giving you extra max resistance should allow you to hit the caps in. Cold and lightning resistance, we don't care that much, I don't think. Our beast has so much life that it dying to damage is very rare. If it does die to damage, it's usually chaos or physical. So chaos resistance wouldn't be a terrible mod. It's not something that I prioritize. All of the extra damage mods here are fantastic. These are sort of the best in slot. We want 2 of these on our endgame beast. The most valuable is extra fire damage, because this doesn't need anything else to apply to Infernal Legion. The next most valuable is chaos damage, because Azov's Pyre will let this apply to Infernal Legion damage. If that is your combination, then you do not need the Bringer of Flame on Infernalist. If your combination includes either cold or lightning, you're going to need a way for those types to actually apply to Ignite. Always in Fiflix, bleeding. Bleeding could be useful. I think it has more applications in other beast builds where you're trying to exploit and consume a bleed of some kind on an enemy. We're not doing that here. And we have 100% bleed chance ourselves, so it's not helping us very much. All damage ignites is essentially the same as the Bringer of Flame, except for it only applies to the minion. It wouldn't apply to us. So in some ways it would be better, because we wouldn't have to use elemental focus and so on to avoid lighting our oil. I have never seen an all damage ignites beast with 2 extra damage mods. I don't know if it's possible for them to roll together. So in practice, it's not very likely that you can utilize this mod very well. All damage chills is fine. I wouldn't mind that mod as an extra. Just imply another ailment, slow down bosses, it's fine. All damage shocks is fine, especially in the axe in the early game when you don't have a great source of secondary shock. Always poisons, again, isn't really relevant for us, although in a different build where you cared about having poisons and bleeds and consuming ailments and whatnot, that could be quite helpful. Similarly, breaking armor could be quite helpful if you're looking for a utility beast. And the same goes for a stunning beast. These are all ideas for different builds down the road. At time of filming in 0.4, increased critical hit chance doesn't do much of anything because the Infernal Legion seems to crit all the time anyway. Down the road, this may end up being a premium mod. Accuracy, I don't think does anything for your minions, and we don't hit anyway. Pasted, this is fantastic. 30% move speed is definitely premium. We don't care about the attack speed or the cast speed at all. But we do want, for example, our Plague Harvester to fly around the map faster. Increased area of effect used to be one of the most premium mods. I think with the advent of oil grenades, it's not as useful. It'll still allow your beast to ignite a pack sooner, and you can think of it kind of as movement speed. In a similar way that your beast would get to a pack sooner if he could run faster, and here his reach is just further. For the most part, it's nice to have, but I wouldn't prioritize it too highly. It's also one of the rarer mods and doesn't spawn on every sort of monster. For example, I don't think a Plague Harvester can have it. if I'm not mistaken, a enemy needs to have a area of effect skill for it to be able to roll this mod. Additional projectiles, fantastic mod, but not for us. Again, that's some other build. 4 extra projectiles, no downside. Armor doesn't hurt, but again, it's not something that I prioritize. Neither would I prioritize evasion. Extra energy shield is actively useless for us because it'll just burn this shield off. And because it's constantly burning, it'll never regenerate it. Increased life would be fantastic, but I've never seen this on a cashable rare. I've only seen this on minions of a rare. If anyone can contradict me, I'd be happy to hear where you saw one. But as far as I know, this is not possible to catch on a rare. Regenerate life is quite nice. This is basically a vial mending or a part of the well replacement. Again, this helps you sustain Infernal Legion 3 without the same investment that you normally would need. If I got this alongside 2 extra damage mods, I'd be extra. If I got this alongside 2 extra damage mods, I'd be quite happy. Crit resistance, I don't think matters. Stun resistance doesn't matter. It has a huge threshold. Slow resistance. Slow is usually not keeping the beast off any boss or anything. Damage taken from minions first doesn't do anything for us. Potentially you could have a minion that has its own minions, and that would be interesting. Trail of Fire is probably the least useful, and I'd be concerned that this might trigger the oil a lesser ignite. I don't believe that this scales quite as well as Infernal Legion, so I would not want this ignite to light the oil. So I would probably avoid Trail of Fire if possible. Trail of Ice is great, slow, guaranteed. Trail of Lightning is fine, again, just kind of a free shock. Extra useful when you're just mapping against small rares, and it just helps the beast solo them faster without you having to do anything out of the ordinary, cast anything. Periodically unleashes fire. This is part of a family of skills, many of these skills that are actively bad. I'll avoid catching them in some cases. The reason is, player, you're trained to dodge most of these. And if you have a beast next to you that's constantly exploding corpses or unleashing fire, your instinct is to dodge that. And eventually you will stop dodging it. But at which point a enemy's actual exploding corpse will kill you. So you're sort of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't position. You're constantly going to have to be dodging because you can't tell whether it's a friendly or an enemy effect. And frankly, it's not worth the stress. They don't really do any extra damage, and they don't scale very well, so I wouldn't really recommend any of these. Flame Wall, I guess, is fine. Again, I'd have the same concerns with Trail of Fire. I wouldn't want this to ignite the oil. And it's also visual clutter. Ice Prisons, no. Visual clutter. Conjure Storms, that's kind of debatable. Again, you run into the same problem where you're trying to dodge it, but it has a little more utility, like the shock is a little bit useful. Ironberry is good defensively, but it's up to you whether you think the visual clutter is worth it. In general, I don't go for this, but I might find it acceptable if the other mods were good enough. Lightning Mirages, again, is similar as Conjure Storms, where it matters whether you care about the shock or not. If the shock is worth the visual clutter and potentially dodging your own friendly mirages, go for it. Siphon's Mana doesn't seem to really have any effective damage that matters. This is just sort of neither great nor bad as far as I can tell. I would avoid Bombardier. I would absolutely avoid nearby corpses exploding. That's probably the most annoying, maybe the second most annoying mod that you can get on your beast. Heals allies. I haven't found this to be especially useful. The beast won't heal itself. The beast will only use this if its health dips down below, and we don't care enough about our life on this build. We care more about energy shield. Usually our passive regen and our life flask is enough to keep our small life buffer full. Shroudwalker is a bit of a mixed bag. It does help your beast gap close quicker, but on the other hand, it makes it unpredictable, and You can have instances where it is approaching a pack, and then as it almost gets there, it teleports to some other pack, especially as you're trying to run and sort of have the invisible leash on your beast to kind of control where it's going. This makes that much harder. So personally, I would avoid this. Potentially, if we were a evasion build, the smoke cloud and the blind would be more relevant and might make it worth using. Or if you had an incredibly slow beast, it might make it worth using. Soul Eater, if I'm not mistaken, in Path of Exile 2 is changed. So if an enemy dies in your presence, this is different from Path of Exile 1, if I'm not mistaken, where you have to get the kill. So our beast does not get the kills usually, we get the kills because they're dying to an ailment. But the Soul Eater will still work. Unfortunately, we don't really care. Again, damage reduction is not what we're focused on, and skill speed is not what we're focused on either. So this is pretty marginal. Siphons flasks. If you know any boss that has flasks, I mean, go wild with this, but generally speaking, it's not very useful. Again, it's sort of a neutral mod, neither helpful nor not helpful. Prevents recovery. Again, most things will just be dead, so it's not super useful. Your aura, I could see this being helpful in running down certain enemies, but for the most part, I look at it as clutter and not being worth hunting. Temp Bubble, on the other hand, currently running this on my beast. There is a little bit of visual clutter. It makes it a little harder to see because he has the sphere around him. But it does reduce the action speed of your enemies by a slight bit, and that can add up, especially with the cooldown recovery reduction working alongside your persistent ground debuff. That'll help keep the bosses from using their most deadly spells more often. So this is fine. It's not a GG amazing mod you want to go after, but it does definitely have its utility. The Elemental Resistance aura is kind of a strange one because you don't want your personal resistances to depend on this, because if the beast ever walks out of range, you are pretty But what it can be useful for is the beast to apply itself, where it says here, you, that would be referring to the beast. So it can boost its own resistances a little bit. And because it walks around with the aura, it's never going to walk out of the aura, so that's fine. Again, this is largely a positive mod. Energy Shield aura. This is super cool for us because we do have a high maximum life. So gaining a good chunk of it as extra energy shield is very welcome. Again, you have a problem of the beast coming in and out of your range, so your energy shield's going to fluctuate. But mostly in boss situations, you and the beast are sort of standing on the boss, so when you need it most, it should be there. Haste Aura, I would say, is the best mod besides the extra damage mods. Gives the beast a giant movement speed bonus, and it also gives you a giant movement speed bonus. The cast time doesn't hurt for some of our spells either. Haste Aura is fantastic. Again, not every beast type can get this. Like the haste mod itself, I think if a beast has got a certain base speed, it's unable to spawn this, and Plague Harvesters are definitely an example of that, which is one of their downsides. It's easy to get the extra physical damage aura confused with the elemental versions, the extra cold, extra fire. These are gain percentage as extra, whereas the physical damage aura is increased physical damage. Now, we don't actually do any physical damage, so increasing nothing is not useful. This is fantastic as a utility beast in some other build, but as far as Infernal Legion goes, this is not a useful aura. Tangibility is another survivability mod, not something I'd prioritize. I don't think there's really any downside to it. Powerful reviving minions and empowered reviving minions, these are all, again, things that would apply to our minions. There are a few beasts which do create minions, but I haven't explored those at all. Certainly not in the context of Infernal Legion. The invulnerability auras. I've seen some interesting builds that people have 2 beasts and they sort of alternate to try to keep as much uptime as possible. For our current build here, these aren't especially useful. These again are pretty much null. The invulnerability could give you a window to let your energy shield recharge start, which might be helpful. But for the most part, again, we're not really concerned about dying. We're pretty tanky. And due to the nature of it being sort of fickle on and off, we can't depend on it reliably. So I wouldn't go on my way looking for this. Now, both of these enrages, we used to prioritize enraged. It was our number one. It was our number one mod when we first started playing Infernal Legion. We didn't understand how pseudo hits worked at the time, and we were also taking the wiki page here as gospel. But when we actually sat down in the lab, as far as I could test, the 50% reduced damage taken does not apply, at least to its own burn. I didn't thoroughly test incoming damage from enemies because the burn's the significant thing we cared about, and it didn't improve its damage at all. It did slightly improve the time to kill through the action speed, letting your beast throw hands a little faster, or bite, or claws, or whatever it's doing. But it doesn't actually affect Infernal Legion to have better action speed. So unfortunately, all this mod does is make your beast look really cool and big. So if you're looking for that drip, prioritize it. Otherwise, it's not really an effective mod. Volatile plants and empowered plants, I hate these. These are the absolute worst thing to get on your beast. They will usually spawn to go attack a enemy, and then the enemy will die before these get there, and these purple balls will just be floating around the map endlessly. And I find it exceedingly annoying, so do not get that one. Crags, similar. These are something that you'll dodge thinking it's an enemy, but it's your friendly, so you dodged for nothing and wasted your roll. And then one day you will stand in a crag and it'll blow your face off because it was an enemy's crag. It'd be real nice if GGG implemented some kind of color option where, you know, the flame was a slightly different hue or what have you to indicate that a skill was being used by a friendly minion. Juice probably isn't worth the squeeze, and for now I just say the rule of thumb is if one of these mods produces something that you would have to dodge, you do not want it on your tame beast. Let's take a bit of a step back from the tame beast and look at Infernal Legion more generally. Explain why I pick this as my preference, but it may point to things that you would rather do instead. And a lot of what we've covered in this guide is useful to any Infernal Legion build. So if we consider the upsides and the downsides about Tame Beast, one of the downsides is it, generally speaking, takes a lot of spirit. If you're playing an archer or some class that doesn't invest in spirit and doesn't have much spirit, this is actually fine because a percentage of your not very big spirit pool means it's pretty cheap. And you can get a useful aura or what have you. As you start investing in more and more into spirit, the amount as a percentage becomes more painful. So that's one knock against it. Besides that, you can only capture beasts, so there's plenty of enemies that you would rather have captured, but you can't just because of the wrong base type. And then there is the issue of getting the perfect mods that you want. Some of you may be in the Brotherhood or the Sisterhood of grinding maps for hours and hours trying to find the correct mods on the correct beast. I'm mostly looking at you elephant players. If you get unlucky, this can be awful. There is a fun aspect to it that as you're roaming through a map, you might find, oh my gosh, the perfect mods. but the odds of that are actually pretty low, especially getting it on the right type. Sometimes even if you see the right mods, they're not on a base of beast that is all that good. A small tip here on the PoE2DB website: if you go to the Tame Beast skill gem page, you can go to monsters, and this will show you a list of essentially every monster that you could catch with it. Some of these are actually not catchable, but they are tagged as beasts. And you can sort by life percentage to get the chunkiest at the top and work your way down. I'll get more into beast options in a little bit. The main upside of the beast is the mods, though. The extra damage mods are extremely powerful. Haste aura is extremely powerful. Energy shield aura is powerful. This gives a payoff to the pain of setting up and finding the perfect beast, because once you've found it, you have a genuine companion that is, one of a kind and not replaceable. Moving on to maybe the more popular version of the build, which would be on Spectres. Spectres have some upsides. For one thing, it's very easy to catch pretty much any of them. You don't need to catch them, you just need to kill them, and you don't need to have any special mods at all. Well, again, that's a downside in that you don't have the benefit of the mods. It's also an upside in that you don't have to worry about that. You can also run multiple minions. It could make sense to run 2 or 3 just for coverage, although if you're using the oil grenade tech, I don't think that is worth doing. And because they're going to be cheaper to have one Spectre than to have one Beast, you have more spirit at hand to pump into muster or some other way to improve the Beast. To improve the Spectre, habit. One downside that jumps to mind immediately is the Prism of Belief for Spectres is much more expensive. I think it's 10 times the cost of the Prism for a Tame Beast. I mean, that depends on the economy, but generally speaking, it's a lot quicker to get into your Beast Prism than your Spectre Prism. Another benefit that Spectres have is they're not bound by Beast type. You can get undead, you can get demons, you can get whatever you like. You can also get non-rares. I think that's actually pertinent in some cases. Some mobs will never really spawn as a rare, so for example, ads that come out during a boss fight, those will never be rare. You can Spectre some of those where you're never going to find a beast equivalent of that. I don't know if endgame, if Spectres end up just being categorically stronger than Tame Beast. It really depends on your mods. If a Tame Beast has GG mods on a GG Beast type, I don't see how we beat that. It's definitely possible since some of the Spectres have very high life themselves, and that could claw back an advantage from the bonuses that the mods give you. There's another type of minion which is very similar to a Tame Beast. His Grave Command skill, which comes from a staff you can get from the Abyss boss. This is essentially Tame Beast, except for taming beasts, you're taming undead. So the undead type is a different type of monster, different than beasts. So having undead instead of beasts gives you an opportunity to find totally different kinds of monsters. They may have different abilities, they may have different movement skills, etc. They may have different health pools. They may have actual attacks or spells that they cast that are relevant. I don't think this skill has been explored fully as an Infernal Legion vehicle, but part of the reason for that is you have to hold the staff in your hand to have the beast. So the opportunity cost of losing your scepter, not having the spear handy, it's a significant drain. And the same downside as the Tame Beasts have. When it comes to finding the mods, you'll again have that here. You'll need to find a rare undead with the extra mods that you're looking for, and that search can take a while. It could be that there's a perfect base type of undead out there that we just haven't figured out. We'll see down the road where this goes. Another contender is the row amount, and this is mostly a contender because of a odd, I don't want to say bug, but Infernal Legion is only allowed to go on minions that are damageable. And the Roa is damageable until you get on it, in which case it is not damageable. As long as you're on it, it won't take Infernal Legion damage, which means you don't need to care about investing in any mitigation, besides some stun avoidance on yourself so you don't get knocked off. It also comes with more minion health as a quality stat. And I suppose most importantly, you get to drive the thing. You don't have to hope that the minion goes a certain way or wrangle the AI or any of that. Just run around where you're trying to go and boom. An issue with this is that you can shoot bows and spears off the back, but for whatever reason, you cannot shoot crossbows. So I don't see how you could effectively use this with oil grenades. I've seen people use Infernal Legion gas arrow Roa, but that's a very different build. This is something to be aware of. If you're a diehard Chocobo fan, this might be the way to go. But considering that it has a bit of a smaller life pool and that it can't use oil grenade tech, personally I haven't built around it. Next we have Skeletal Brutes. This is speculative. For one thing, they are dirt cheap. They also have a command skill. This means you can use a support gem to give them Unholy Might, which is about 30% extra damage. I'm not sure if that adds up to be more than, say, Searing Flame, but it's possible that it may. The Warcry and Stun is not especially interesting. For their cost, they have a pretty significant health pool, I would say. It's not too shabby of a base to build on, so potentially if you can work around the command skill giving extra bonuses, you might be in pretty good shape. We're going to have to do a brute build soon. I mentioned wolves is another companion option. Now obviously 2 Infernal Legion auras do not stack, so having more than one burning wolf on an enemy won't actually do any more damage. So you're only as powerful as your strongest single wolf, which is why I prefer a skill like Tame Beast where you have a single entity and not a gang. Again, like having multiple specters, having more infernal wolves could help with clear somewhat, but also again, oil sort of negates that. The companion type on this gem comes with upsides and downsides. The main downside is that you can only have one companion, so you can't run wolves alongside your Hellhound, Roa, Beast, etc. For the upsides, there are companion-specific damage nodes and items. One of the most important actually is companion emeralds. These are much more efficient than jewels for generic minions. It's something that the specters can't take advantage of. We've seen the importance of rare jewels go down as jewel sockets have been removed. In the earlier game, before you filled all your sockets with uniques, rare jewels are pretty significant. As for the tree, most of the companion-specific nodes are down in the lower right. There are a few new ones on the upper left between the Witch and the Druid. Overall, I would say the Wolf Pack is probably better as a damage sponge utility minion in some other sort of build, not a premier Infernal Legion target. Zombies are somewhat interesting to me in that, if I'm not mistaken, more damage with hits should apply to the pseudo hit that we use to ignite enemies. So as you scale this higher and higher, and if you're able to stack significant amounts of quality, I would be interested to see how much an empowered zombie could do damage-wise. These have the advantage of costing actually no spirit at all. Some of the recent changes to how empowered zombies spawn, I believe, made them a little less viable. You'll have to ask some of the experts in our Discord community. But I am curious to see if, instead of a zombie horde playstyle, if a single empowered zombie at once style would pay off as enough investment. For Warbringers, you can put Infernal Legion on Ancestral Spirits, and I think the Turtle in particular can get quite a bit of life. Because we're using oil tech, we can get around some of their mobility issues and still benefit from the buffs that they give us. My main issue here is that you can't force a turtle, and so you would have big damage swings depending on which of your minions ignites. Oil might do absolute tons of damage or almost none. And that's not really a place I think you want to be. Good old trusty Infernal Hellhound. Fortunately, they nerfed this so it doesn't have the built-in damage reduction on you. And its built-in version of Infernal Legion doesn't do as much damage as Infernal Legion 3. More importantly, it just can't scale to the amount of life that you need to compete with the rare mods or with huge specters. I am mentioning it though because with the oil grenade tech, there might be some sort of ignited enemies matter build where you use some other sort of minion to get a payoff from consuming the ignite. And this is a way to get a decent Infernal Legion style beast without having to really invest in any damage mitigation. And lastly, I wanted to mention some of the Djinn and animate weapon and other options out there are not going to work because they are invulnerable. So they're not allowed to use the Infernal Legion support gem. They're off the table. A lot of other minions in the game, but most of them just don't have the base life to make any sense. If I've missed any that are strong contenders, let me know in the comments. But I think I covered the basics here. Also let me know if you've made a sick zombie Infernal Legion build lately. When it comes to catching rares, there's quite a lot of beast options. Let me show you a couple places where you can sort them by their most relevant mods, and then I'll go down the list, giving my thoughts on some of the main contenders. And on PoE 2DB, you can go to the Tame Beast skill gem page, and clicking on monsters, you can sort by life, and a fairly decent list. I prefer to use the Spectre Wiki, because at any point here we can jump over and see what this beast actually looks like and how it works in action. Even though they're specters in these videos, it's still useful to see how they move, and it's easy to imagine just one raging beast instead of a gang. So again, here you can sort by life. At the top of the pile here, we have the Elephant Tortoise. This has got a huge amount of life. When you're looking at base spirit cost, this is for specters, so this is not applied to tame beasts, though you can see relative values that translate. Elephant Tortoises are the largest base health bonus in the game. So Elephant Tortoises are the big boy in the room with the highest life modifier. There's a relationship with most of these beasts where the bigger they are and the higher life total they have, the slower they tend to move. So the chonky boys, like the Elephant Tortoise or the Crested Behemoth, are generally better used as weapon swap beasts. I don't tend to go with that playstyle myself, so I don't have the most experience with these. I do have some experience hunting tortoises and behemoth. So you can find the tortoises in Axe. Be aware that whenever you're catching a beast in the Axe, it's going to have a lower level, and it's going to be less likely to have a full set of mods than if you found it in maps. So if I recall correctly, they spawn in the Asmiri ranges, so trying to farm them on the Atlas makes more sense. Crested Behemoths, on the other hand, don't really spawn outside of the Trial of Chaos, besides very rarely from strongboxes. They again are a big chunky boy. It's better off being used with weapon swapping instead of letting it free roam, since it's too slow to keep up on its own. Weapon swapping got potentially a little stronger with oil grenades, but we won't get into that. As we scroll down the list here through other options, Witching Serpent, I think you do have to catch an axe, and it's a very cool beast. The problem being is that it's mostly a ranged caster or range attacker, and unfortunately it doesn't like to gap close. In situations like this where you have a ranged beast, you're probably going to want to play it on some sort of weapon swap to force it into range. Frozen Mandibles, aka the Cocaine Ant. These were fantastic, especially on mouse and keyboard where you could direct the minions by hand. I know a lot of folks went out of their way to catch increased AoE mandibles, but I really wasn't necessary because if you drive them manually, they were fast enough to just clear the heck out of the map. But sadly, these have been disabled. You can no longer catch them. Stoneclad Gorilla looks very cool and is very cool. It's another Trial of Chaos beast, although I believe you can find them in the interludes as well. My main complaint with them is they have a wind-up slam attack that ends up taking forever, and everything will be dead around them from the Infernal Legion by the time they get it off, so you often have him just standing around, winding up doing nothing. As far as the bigger beasts and the non-cocaine enjoying beasts, it is a little fast for its size here. The Dredge Osteodon is not fast. I know that there is a Spectre synergy between the Zealots, if I'm not mistaken, the Enrage, which I think makes it faster and may make it do more damage. I don't know if that actually makes the Infernal Legion do any damage. I haven't got around to testing that. The Bloodleaf Queen has the utility of making minions. She's a summoner. There may be some relevant tie-in between having those distraction units and having a rather large body, but she's one of the slowest minions in the game, so definitely not my style. I haven't played much with the Burrowers. If I'm not mistaken, they can ignite from underground. I'd need to get more hands-on before I can give you a decent review. I know many people swear by the Vile Vultures. These are a very respectable pick as your minion. They have a good balance of mobility and life, and most importantly, they're very aggressive, have a gap-closing leap, which makes them move even faster. Scarecrow Beast is somewhat similar. I'd say it's a little worse. Not only is it slightly lower life multiplier, it just feels slightly slower than the Vulture to me. Fettered Spiders come from cleansed maps. They are difficult to find rare. You'll maybe see one rare Fettered Spider every other map. I do have a soft spot for these. Before the Cocaine Ant League, these were my minion of choice because of their healthful and speed balance. You could manually drive them. For the most part, they are very good. The main downside is that she has the tendency to want to spit in everything's face, and while she's in this ranged spitting mode, she's not gap closing. So she loses some of her speed advantage because she likes to stand around and be abusive. Gargantuan Wasp is next. This is essentially a Plague Harvester. I don't know if there's any real difference in the stats. They're colored slightly differently. This is definitely my beast of choice for clearing maps. They have a very aggressive dive mechanic. They can go from one corner of the screen to the other if they feel like it. And they also have unimpeded pathing, so they can fly off of ledges, cross gaps, they can move through very small holes in a wall. They do have some utility in maps with a lot of rivers or other barriers where you can manually direct them across the river to burn out the enemies there without having to waste time trying to path yourself around. But primarily I use them for the speed. Shrikes I have no first-hand experience with. Amphibious Prowlers I don't have much experience with. Serpent Shamans are basically the same as a Bewitching Serpent, just worse. Plague Harvesters, again, are a Wasp. Quadrilla I personally didn't care for. They're similar to the Hulks. I know some people swear by these, especially early, but I would take a Dire Tusk Boar or almost anything instead early. The Hulks are all basically the same as Quadrillas as far as I know. Atline Charger I do not like. His gap close ability tends to descend him off of the screen into nothing, in which case he's not there when you need him, and his unpredictability just sort of makes it not very useful. Sunclan Scavenger mostly fires at range and doesn't willingly like to gap close very much, so he's off the table, I'd say. Cerberic Bats look frickin' sweet. They do have a leap attack, and they do have very interesting hybrid damage breath attacks, as you can see here. But for having a lower life total, they don't really make up for that by being too much faster. And again, they're harder to catch. They mainly show up in the Trial of Chaos, or I believe you can catch them in the interludes as well. A few patches ago, this Scoot Lizard was actually fairly useful, as was basically any beast that didn't have any special attacks, just kind of wandered up and slapped their enemy. This was because some bugs in the animation canceling, if you had too many attacks that your beast was doing, it seemed to interrupt the Infernal Legion burn. But these days with the changes to the skill, it doesn't seem to matter. And besides which oil ground, make sure that the burn is constant anyhow. Black Striders, if I'm not mistaken, have only recently been enabled. I don't have experience with one as a pet. I haven't seen good mods on one. Might be one to investigate though. I would worry that being ranged somewhat, they would hang too far back, but their actual skills may have some utility. The Alpha Primate is something that I would take over a Quadrilla usually, but again I would take a Boar over it. The Experimental Boar is another new addition. This comes from the Val Temple. And the Dire Tusk Boar is a very decent beast, especially as soon as you hit Act 3. The Dweller is again basically a burrower. The Doomlooper is also a burrower. I've seen these used in some Infernal Legion builds, and they especially seem to be useful with oil grenades. I haven't explored burrowing archetype very much yet. And I could not end it without talking about Otter's favorite beast, that is the Prowling Chimera. Beast has a very small health pool. It is incredibly annoying to catch because it doesn't spawn very reliably in maps, so you do have to catch it in the axe. Or if you find one that's rare, it'll probably only have 1 or 2 mods that aren't any good. And I have never been able to catch a even halfway decent one. But Otter's proven that you don't even need a halfway decent one to clear the entire game. Of special note is the moveset of the Chimeral, where it does a sort of sideways dodge and dash, spreads the fire very effectively. This is potentially one of the better beasts for controller players. According to Otter, who's a controller expert, this beast feels the best. On controller, you don't have the same dexterity when it comes to directing your minions. You can send them in a general direction, but you can't click the ground and specifically get them to hold choke points or move exactly where you would like them to. Given that disadvantage, the very autonomous nature of the Chimeral makes it a choice that Otter at least swears by. You can see that the life total we've scrolled down to is pretty modest by this point compared to the turtles at more than twice as much. But even with mediocre mods, as you tend to get on a Chimeral, tame beasts can definitely punch above their weight, and you have plenty of options between raw, chunky damage, down to more utility, or extreme utility. Every expansion they're adding in new beasts, so this list is going to continue to grow. There's always a bit of excitement as a beast hunter when you're entering a new act for the first time and seeing all types of new beasts, and you're thinking which of these is going to be useful, either in an Infernal Legion build or something else. I remember the first day that I found it and caught the Frozen Mandibles, how exciting that was. So best in slot beasts like this are going to continue to appear, and the hunt for that is some of the fun. Let's consider some of our options for class selection. Witches tend to have an advantage on this top section of the tree. They get these witch-specific nodes that increase damage early, giving them probably the smoothest leveling experience if you're leveling with minions. So situated in such a way that much of the max minion life and resistance nodes are in easy reach. We consider this further corner. There's quite a few companion nodes. These are out of range for the witch, but generally tend to be less value than what she has access to in the top left. Primary reason for picking an Infernalist is the Bringer of Flame notable. This allows you to catch a more powerful beast with less work, more reliably getting a double extra damage beast before you even get to maps. Finding a beast of similar power is going to take many hours of farming, so this jumpstarts you, and it's what makes this probably the smoothest league starter. Previously, it was also worth playing Infernalist because the Seething Body node would give your allies extra fire damage, which directly buffed Infernal Legion. A combination of that with Pyromantic Pact and Altered Flesh work very smoothly. You would invest into 90 fire res on yourself. Your cold and lightning would be taken as fire and get reduced, and burning yourself with pyromantic pact wouldn't do much damage at all. Since they changed Seething Body, I prefer to take an altered flesh route into extra survivability and utility. A league start, hybrid items with life and energy shield seems to be priced a little more accessibly. The other option for which may actually be stronger at the end of the day, is the Lich, of course. One of the primary reasons is that she gets access to free Unholy Might. This is 30% extra damage as Chaos, and with Azov's Pyre, that extra Chaos damage will apply to the Infernal Legion burn. This is about the equivalent of 1 extra damage mod on a rare. So if you were to get an extra fire and extra chaos beast, you wouldn't need the Bringer of Flame. All damage can ignite, since all your damage types already ignite, and Lich would, at that point, be a better choice. If you scale into mana, you can push the effectiveness of Unholy Might. I've gotten this up to 90% or so damage as chaos. Infernal Legion Beast does so much damage that pushing that further at the cost of defenses doesn't feel worth it to me. Which also comes with the Phylactery doubling the power of a Companion Emerald. So it's 40% ink life and 40% ink damage. Can get supplemental clear out of Rupture the Soul. My experience with the Oil Grenade build, though, things are dying so far away from you all over the screen that Blasphemy isn't consistently covering them. There's, of course, the Abyssal Lich as well. This loses Unholy Might, which is one of the main reasons you take the class. Still has a Phylactery, but I feel like the Vanilla Lich is most likely a better play. Looking at Sorceress, it seems like Disciple is the best choice. The other classes don't especially have any minion synergies or anything we can leverage with Infernal Legion, but the Disciple does. The smart tech I learned from Rindar here is taking each of the Jinn provides 3 persistent minions for muster, making a muster Infernal Legion Sorceress build pretty effective. I think the damage here is pretty similar to Unholy Might. However, you wouldn't need a Zof's Pyre. So for a solo self-found build, this might be a stronger starting point. The Monk isn't positioned perfectly, but he's in the neighborhood. One consideration is if they ever fix Selfless Remnants, you'll be able to give your Remnant power to your allies. You could use Into the Breach to funnel chaos damage into your beast, each flame effectively being a small Unholy Might, which could add up to be pretty significant. At the time of recording in 0.4, purple flames aren't able to be shared though. So we'll put a pin in this one for now. We have seen players successfully play Ritualist Infernal Legion by taking the extra ring and ring effect slots and stacking grasping rings. Again, this is extra damage, which scales the pseudo hit of the beast, and with Soft's Pyre will contribute to the Ignite. So it is possible to produce a build on this side of the tree. I don't feel that the minion nodes in this area are especially fantastic. If you prefer more of an evasion setup, there are companion nodes in this area. She's also close to some of the high value grenade nodes that you might want to increase the oil grenade side of your build. There's also the Gemling. The quality of skills he provides will give you back a lot of spirit reservation on the beast. Also provides +2. And I suppose extra damage with integrated efficiency. Again, the mercenary start is pretty far from relevant minion nodes, but he is close to the grenades once again, and not too far from various companion nodes. Titan minion builds are a bit of a staple, as you can take hulking form and increase the effectiveness of small nodes, minion damage, minion life, and cumulatively stock those up to compete with things like the Unholy Might that the Lich gets, or the Sorceress's muster bonus. Definitely an option if you want to try to path to as many small nodes as possible. The Warbringer can get supplemental Infernal Legion damage out of the Ancestral Spirits. I don't find it reliable enough to build around. The Smith of Catawba, which was our original design, to make a super accessible build that you can't really go wrong with, because of how strong his resistance nodes were. At the time of making that video, there was a lot more access to maximum res on the tree. They've replaced most of that with armor applies to elemental damage. Previously, we were able to cap our own fire resistance very easily, and then use the Carrion Call unique to transfer that cap resistance to our minion. This solved the damage mitigation for your beast, but that route no longer seems very viable. Smith is still a very good league starter, very gear independent, very tanky, and definitely can make a decent Beastmaster. Last but not least, the Druid classes. We'll start with the Oracle, though some of this applies to both. We start out positioned very well in the tree, arguably as well as the Witch. For the Oracle, I believe you would go Walk the Paths Not Taken and Entwined Realities to try and grab as many passives as possible. The biggest single payoff for being an Oracle is probably Forbidden Path. Minions gain 20% of elemental damage as extra chaos. It is almost as strong as Unholy Might. This will get some incidental access to companion / minion life and damage throughout the tree. If you can find the perfect setup to get the most out of Entwined Realities, there's a lot of potential here, but I personally haven't come out with a layout that I really love. Let's take a look at the Shaman. Positioned in the exact same spot in the tree, pretty advantageous. Quite a strong summoner class, I would say. Getting rid of your charms for extra spirit is a fantastic base for your minion horde. Doesn't work especially well with tame beasts, since the more spirit you have, the more it costs. Kind of a non-bow there. Shaman may work better in a Infernal Legion Spectre build, for example. He has some great defensive nodes. He also has rage-related nodes. Commanding Rage. Every rage also grants minion damage, should apply to the Infernal Legion. Wielding a scepter and a talisman at once would let you cast Oil Barrage while holding a scepter in your hand, which would drastically improve the damage of the beast during your oil phase. If you're using a crossbow, you don't have your scepter equipped, so when the ignite happens, it's from a much smaller beast. This is still perfectly good for clearing, but going Oil Barrage instead of Oil Grenade could be interesting, and his extra spirit helps let him deal with the downside of Lord of the Wilds. Going the talisman route would also let you use Pounce for mobility. Between Pounce and Disengage, you'd be very slippery. And with Adaptation, should end up being pretty tanky. Definitely a worthy pick. Maybe top 3. I wanted to focus specifically real quick on extra damage and damage types and resistances. There are occasions, especially when you're playing a Lich, where at least half of your Infernal Legion's damage is Chaos, sometimes more. I see people using Wither and Despair to try and lower the Chaos resistance of their enemy in an effort to increase the burn. Sorry to say this does not work. Wither would be fantastic to get to use, but unfortunately, damage types applying to Ignite magnitude don't change the type of damage the Ignite does. The Ignite is always going to be fire damage, with the exception of Stormfire's extra lightning damage, or Black Flame Covenant turning all your Ignite damage into chaos. And you can see from the wording on Covenant, Ignite inflicted deals chaos damage instead of fire damage. Whereas contributes to flammability and Ignite magnitudes is worded very differently. There's no indication here that the final Ignite damage will be anything but fire. You may say, fair enough, and we still do a pseudo hit to calculate the Ignite. This is true, but unfortunately we're still not helped by lowering their chaos resistance or their resistance at all. It's not explained very clearly here on the bottom. When it says debuffs, it includes things like Despair or Exposure, or pretty much anything that's going to make it take more damage, such as Shock and Wither. The next step in calculating a hit's damage is comparing the hit to resistances, to if it's shocked, to armor, and all that. That step doesn't happen until after the Ignite. As it says here, not any modifiers on the target that affect how much damage they will take from the hit, aka Wither or Despair. It would appear to me the reason they do this is so that you don't double dip on your debuffs. Say you have some kind of fire exposure that's lowering the fire resistance of your enemy. If that's part of the calculation for the hit, it'll also still be part of the calculation for the ongoing burn, and that seems too efficient. So we only get to dip once. And we take our dip while the burn is going. While the Ignite is already set on the enemy, we can make it take more damage, either by generic more damage taken like Shock, or lowering their resistance to fire as much as we can. Again, the burn is entirely fire damage, so chaos resistance, for example, won't do anything. This also all goes for Rakyata's Flow. I see people using this with the Infernal Legion as well. The Ignite is calculated before elemental resistances are considered, so inverting them doesn't make the pseudo hit any larger, and because Ignites are not a hit once they're on the target, they're not able to use Rakyata's Flow to invert the resistances. So this is not the support that you're looking for. You're still here? I don't even want to still be here. If you watched that entire thing, I'm impressed, and I hope you got something out of it. Circling back to the start, like I said, I'd like this video to be something of a dialogue. As patches come and changes happen, we're going to need to evolve, and a lot of this information won't be as relevant anymore. We're gonna have to find new tricks and solve new puzzles. A lot of what we covered here is the result of a whole community of people coming together and contributing their time and creativity. So I'd like to thank them for their efforts. And I'd like to thank you for watching and for contributing your ideas into the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, we can help make that happen with your support. Sharing and liking and subscribing, you know. Until next time.